Welcome to this session. This is a shortish keynote session. It was due to be a government minister, and that fell victim to the grid. But I'm absolutely delighted to, I'm deliberately not mentioning the name of the government minister, because I want to make a comparison. We've got a speaker today, Maurice Glasman, Lord Glasman, who I'm sure is going to be a lot more exciting and unleashed than the government minister would have been able or prepared to have been. And originally this session was specifically designed to be quite short. So Maurice not only has had 3 days notice, but he's had 3 days notice that he's got to do the equivalent of a TED Talk. And I was just told the definition of a TED Talk is that it has to be shorter than Martin Luther King's "I've Got a Dream" speech. And that's why they've deliberately made them short. And Maurice, for those of you, most of you do know him, but those of you who don't, he is a great visionary, a great thinker. He is the founder of Blue Labour, but he's also running something today called the Common Good Foundation. And he has many great thoughts about the post-Brexit world, and particularly about the university sector. I suspect what he will say will be controversial for the panel that follows. I'm not sure if they're all in the room or not, but all that is all to the good, because I think we need as much debate as possible. Maurice is a personal friend. We support different football teams, but apart from that, we love talking to each other, and I'm delighted to introduce him to you today. Maurice Glasman.
Good afternoon, and it's really, thank you, Paul, and it's a pleasure to be here. As some of you may know, I'm a Labour politician, and there is an election on, but sometimes you can have too much of a good thing, so it's nice to take a break. You know, unlike Donald Trump, I get tired of winning, you know, and so it's nice to be with you. And it's also my conviction that Brexit offers a space for national renewal. We have to conceptualise this as a moment of renewal, and a time when we need to rediscover statecraft, an understanding of the national institutions necessary for the nurturing of prosperity, civic peace and stability. So in this talk I'll outline briefly the types of reforms we need to make in our universities, and where that fits into a wider educational policy that will also require a discussion of the issues of productivity in our economy. That is what I mean by a new statecraft that can practically and realistically address fundamental problems in an integrated way. So leaving the European Union is in some ways comparable to the Reformation, which was characterised by a scale of institutional innovation and reform which remains unsurpassed. To tell you what I mean, I'd say that in 1500, England was a backwater in munitions, naval technology, mathematics, Greek and Hebrew. The Woolwich Arsenal was founded, and as a Spurs supporter, I wish it had stayed there. You know, what are they doing in North London? It's still a mystery to me. As was the Greenwich Royal Observatory and its Maritime Academy, colleges and chairs were endowed at Cambridge University, the most significant of which was Trinity, with new professorships in maths, Greek and Hebrew. The Royal Exchange was founded in the city as a hub of the emerging Atlantic trade, as well as the various corporations responsible for American settlement, such as the Hudson Bay Company for New York and the Virginia Company with its obvious Elizabethan tinge. The City of London Corporation retained its autonomy and customs and was never fully subordinated to the Crown. And it's interesting to talk here at County Hall. I don't know if any of you remember when London was a democratic city. It's a while ago, but this was its institutional form. Obviously there, the Parliament and the Crown did subordinate it, and the reason it was called County Hall was that London is not a city. It could not be called a city because the Corporation of London claimed its unique status as a city from time immemorial. So in 1500, we were a backwater, but by 1600, our ships ruled the waves. The King James Bible had been published, which established English as a literary language. The Atlantic trade was secured from the Spanish, and London was the undisputed home for investment, insurance, and arbitration, working within the framework of a renewed common law. Guy Fawkes Knight indicated that when it came to gunpowder, we had enough to feed the needy. What enabled that transformation to happen was a bold, determined, distinct statecraft that was based on establishing self-governing corporations, such as Trinity College or the Royal Observatory, which strengthened expertise in particular areas such as maths or astronomy or cartography. It also, see, Lord Cranborne is here. William Burghley was the first Secretary to the Treasury who shepherded the gold from the Golden Hind to the Exchequer, where it formed the basis of the gold standard and the stable currency for 400 years. There are many issues still to be dealt with, I feel, with Spain. But we need to learn from what the Tudors did. As with so much in our world now, the old is the new. So such a statecraft is not based on picking winners, but recognizing fundamental weaknesses in the economy and long-term trends. On the basis of that judgment, institutions are established which strengthen the skills and knowledge required to flourish in the emerging world economy. The Tudors got it right about maths, they were right about the navy, they were right about maritime trade, and they were right about munitions. They established a national institutional framework that underwrote prosperity and security. And we also now need to make a judgment about the long-term trends of the economy, so that we can address our weaknesses and intensify our strengths through institutional design. That is a statecraft of national renewal. Now, I think that our fundamental weaknesses relate to productivity, a lack of a skilled workforce, or any kind of national vocational system worthy of the name. There is a very weak national and regional banking and investment system, certainly compared to the City of London and our global financial services. And this particularly concerns small and medium-sized businesses, as well as the obvious issues arising from the growth of payday loaners. For several decades now, universities have appeared as a cure-all or silver bullet that will provide the remedy for social mobility, employability, and productivity. This has led, in my view, to an overburdening of our universities and in some ways to their degradation, through an erosion of their internal practices and judgments in subordination to government policy. Few universities now work as self-governing corporations, and it is interesting to note that those that do are the most successful globally. So there has been a massive centrally driven expansion in higher education, and this has been to the detriment of our polity, our economy, and also of our universities. Brexit offers the possibility of correcting mistakes and establishing a new framework. In terms of the assumptions of state economic strategy over the past 40 years, irrespective of government, it was assumed that there would be a decline in manual jobs and an increase in what became known as transferable skills. Gordon Brown, for example, predicted in a 2006 speech that there would only be 600,000 low-skilled jobs by 2020. In contrast, the number of cleaners, cooks, security guards and builders has grown. A consensus also developed that what was emerging was a knowledge economy, where the knowledge in question was general, abstract and transferable. This, in an act of incredible egotistical self-aggrandizement by those who proposed it, then grew into the idea of the creative economy, in which the mobile, the literate and the obviously self-defined creative people were the basis of productivity growth and prosperity, and state policy was based on increasing their number. In 1984, there were 70 universities. Now there are 170. 14% of the age cohort went to university then. Now it is 48%. In 1984, the turnover of the higher education sector was 7 billion. Today it is 33 billion. The channeling of national resources into higher education was paralleled by the collapse of the apprenticeship system, which fell from 250,000 apprentices in 1973 to 50,000 in 2016. There are, in contrast, 1.4 million undergraduates. The key moment in the final humiliation of vocation as an educational practice was the transformation of 35 polytechnics into universities in 1992. In the meantime, despite increases in funding and multiple reforms, there has been little improvement in the educational attainment of the bottom quarter of school students. 17% leave school illiterate and 22% innumerate. In this regard, we are genuinely competitive with Albania. Cognitive ability has overshadowed character, competence or experience as a criteria for success. State policy in regards to mediating globalization through a national system was not based on institutions or the reproduction of skills, but the generalization of knowledge. One might say that the human desire to earn and to belong has not been part of the approach, and the result is that a polarized labour market has been paralleled by a polarized politics. This was the fundamental nature of the referendum. The weakness in our vocational and educational systems led to a dependence on immigration, which then became a key political issue. It was the result of long-standing weaknesses in our national educational and vocational systems that it is, I think, our duty to remedy. And this is what needs to change. I would suggest cognitive and transferable knowledge has been dominant in relation to vocational and specific knowledges, and that needs to change. That the transformation of polytechnics into universities in 1992 exacerbated this weakness and was a mistake. Technical schools from the Butler Act were never funded in parity with grammar schools or secondary moderns. Comprehensive schools have not remedied this deficiency. The poorest third of our population have not benefited from educational or economic changes. And so, to quote one of my least favourite political thinkers, Lenin, what is to be done? And I think that there should be vocational pathways in comprehensive schools that lead to apprenticeships in partnership with vocational colleges. Royal colleges should be established as democratic organisations that ethically regulate the manual trades, such as social care, that are now deregulated. In terms of the university sector of higher education, my central proposal is that half the universities should be closed and turned into vocational colleges. We should go further and insist that our remaining universities are properly endowed and pursue knowledge and science according to their own logic. And science and technology parks should be established for each that can bring these innovations to market, as has been the case with Cambridge. The medical, legal and accountancy degrees, however, should be transferred to the vocational colleges, as that would elevate their status and define roles more realistically. It is important to remember that professions are vocations too, and sometimes it is worth reminding accountants of that. There were times when they were too creative, and that was to the detriment of our productivity and our prosperity. Lawyers too. The same applies to doctors, but there's an election on, so I'll leave that for a while. So we are at a moment of great national promise and peril. The symbol for both in Chinese is the same. University reform is part of a wider set of institutional changes that can underpin our national prosperity for the next century. I think that we have been infantilized by EU membership to not think about power, institutions and statecraft, because all those decisions were ultimately for the European Union to decide. I do not think that the election will provide a real debate about the substantive form of our national renewal, and I'm grateful to you for the invitation to talk about it here. Thank you.
Charlie Colchester from the Office of International Diplomacy. Can I just ask you, Lord Glassman, what do you feel about the idea that they have in Germany of people from technical backgrounds having sort of degrees which are of the same value as the ordinary university degrees, because it gives them status?
Thank you. And the question here.
Thank you for such an incisive, great talk. Can I raise the question? Sorry, Nigel Laurie from Royal Holloway. Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes.
That's the question I could raise. You mentioned drastically reducing the number of universities and switching them to vocational institutions. Accepting the general point about the need to re-establish the status of vocational education, let me ask the practical question. How does one get from here to there when there's a need for the vocational skills at the teaching level? Yeah. And I wonder if you have any thoughts about how we do that.
Sure.
I think you've got to go back.
As I was saying, so first of all, Charlie, completely, so maybe the greatest irony of Brexit will be that we take very significant parts of the Mittelstand idea from Germany, particularly of the vocational labour market entry. But bear in mind that now, increasingly, there's three huge legal issues. The post-war social market system, which, don't forget, was also a very British creation. Ernest Bevin was in charge of the area. And in many ways, we went in 1945 centralised, administrative and statist. They went federal, decentralised and vocational. And that's how I would like to define this Brexit moment. I think their system's much better. So in many different ways, we could learn from 45 till about 1990 in Germany, that institutional system that was stable, productive, vocational. This is central. So, you know, it's not available, so I'm not plugging it, but I wrote my PhD thesis on that called Unnecessary Suffering, so contact me and I'll get you a copy. In terms of Nigeria, it's outside the market system as we speak, as with so many academics. And in terms of Nigel's question, from here to there, what I would say is the sum total of my wisdom that I've learned over the last 7 years is that in politics, only where there's a way is there a will. So far, we've been blocked in a very superficial globalization theory that's deinstitutionalized, that involves the unmediated movement of things. We've had a very uncritical attitude towards university education in terms of being a good thing. I notice in my social life, have you noticed that adults think that reading is really good for children? You know, they think it's a fantastic thing for children to do. And I say, don't you ever read your... Oh, no, wouldn't do that. You know, I've got the internet or something like that. So what's required is ultimately a partnership between business, unions, local authorities and the state in terms of the corporate governance framework of the new vocational colleges. And that's embedded in a wider set of statecraft, which is about restoring the counties and the cities of England and Wales so that they are meaningful units. Just say I worked with John Cruddas on the Labour manifesto at the last election. Don't worry about it, no one else read it either. And what we realised was there wasn't, you know, that really we didn't have very much power over that, but we had a budget. So what we did, we asked people where they lived. And it turns out that the parish map of 1517 still gives a much more reliable sense of where people think they live than the administrative map of 1964 or the local reform. So very few people think they live in Medway. Very few people think they live in South Humberside or even Merseyside. The counties and then the cities and then the parish. I mean, that's a very interesting thing we could think about London reform, is to restore parish systems, and maybe this could be renewed not as a venue, an event venue, but actually as a democratic centre of London governance. But maybe even better would be the Guildhall and the institutions of the city. So what I'm saying to you is common good requires a negotiation of conflicting interests. Those interests should be the business interest, the labour interest, the local interest should be all represented in the governance of the vocational colleges. And then that feeds onto the political issue, which is what I mentioned here, which is that there's a good third of the country that feel that we have no regard for their lives or welfare, and that we need to attend to as well as part of the statecraft that I'm talking about.
So I can't let something pass, and that is, I guess it's Ovid.
What's your name? Sorry.
It's Alistair Buchan. Science, medicine is science and the quiet art. It's not just a vocation. And medicine's been transformative for the universities, and the universities have been transformative for the National Health Service. I couldn't let it pass that medicine is key, actually, to the industrial strategy, and medicine is key to our well-being, whether it's cancer or dementia. It's core to what we do academically in this country.
Yeah, and so is the case with law. So that's the issue. So the academic study of medicine and the scientific aspects of medicine take place within the universities. But there's an aspect of the training of GPs, of doctors, that would be greatly, I think, beneficial in terms of conceptualizing that in terms of a vocation.
Formed our world has been medicine being academic, whether it's general practice, whether it's nursing, whether it's social care. It needs to be really at the highest level of data and evidence.
So,
I won't let that pass.
I completely, this is what we have to look at. So it's not, so it's a transformation of a pyramid system, one single pyramid, let's say with Oxford and Cambridge at the top, going down, and some London. So in terms of the transformation of the universities must be free to pursue the academic and scientific work. So there's a freeing up of that. And medical research, I've had the long conversation with the Vice-Chancellor at Cambridge, Boris, who's a key medical researcher, and it's a very interesting conversation. There needs to be greater support for academic research. But then when it comes to the training of the doctors as doctors, so if you have academic medicine, that will proceed within the universities. But when it comes to the training of doctors, there's elements of that could be, I think, much better located within the vocational structure.
Please join me in thanking Maurice very much for